He's sending troops to handle, quote, domestic terrorists.
Leaders in Portland, Oregon are pushing back against attempt to clean up crime.
We authorize the use of full force if necessary.
Portland just witnessed one of the most intense nights of civil unrest in recent memory. What began as a large gathering outside the city's ICE facility turned into a violent clash between Antifa militants, sanctuary mobs, and federal forces. Officials said the crowd had been warned repeatedly to stay behind the security barrier. But as the night wore on, the chants grew louder, fireworks exploded overhead, and bottles and paintballs began striking officers. Once the protesters crossed the blue line of federal property, the situation changed instantly. Federal command authorized a full tactical response. A Marine-backed strike force moved in alongside ICE and DHS units, advancing through the smoke with shields raised and gas masks secured. Within minutes, flashbangs lit up the intersection as agents pushed the crowd back. Residents nearby said the noise was deafening, a series of sharp explosions echoing across blocks of downtown. Federal sources later confirmed that the operation was not improvised. It was planned in advance after several nights of increasing violence outside the compound. Officers had faced repeated attacks with fireworks, glass bottles, and industrial lasers used to blind surveillance cameras. This time, the order was clear: move in, clear the streets, and restore control of federal ground. As tactical units advanced, 3 rioters were immediately tackled and zip-tied while others scattered through nearby streets. Video footage captured scenes that looked more like a battlefield than a protest. Officers moving in formation, tear gas rolling through intersections, and fires burning near the barricades. Officials said several agitators were armed with improvised explosives and construction tools used as weapons. Antifa-linked accounts live-streamed the clashes, calling it resistance. But federal commanders called it domestic chaos. One counter-protester wearing a red MAGA hat was seen being beaten by masked agitators before ICE agents pulled him to safety. By midnight, the intersection around the ICE building was covered in smoke, debris, and shattered glass. Teams worked street by street to secure perimeters and detain suspects. Federal officers reported multiple injuries and property damage, but confirmed the compound was safe. To many, the images of Marines and DHS agents clearing downtown Portland looked like a war zone. Yet officials described it as a necessary defense of federal property under siege. The night ended with dozens of arrests, burned trash bins, and riot gear scattered across the street. Officials later said the operation was not about politics. It was about re-establishing law and order in a city that had allowed violence to grow unchecked. Federal officials confirmed that more than 70 people were detained during the overnight operation. Many faced charges ranging from assaulting law enforcement officers to vandalizing federal property and resisting arrest. ICE agents said several agitators had traveled into Portland from nearby sanctuary zones, using encrypted group chats to coordinate the attack on the facility. Among those detained were known Antifa organizers, foreign nationals without documentation, and local activists accused of providing tactical support. Officers described the crowd as disciplined and organized, moving in teams and using shields, goggles, and tactical gear. Federal commanders said this was not spontaneous outrage. It was coordinated resistance. The order given to all units was simple: if you cross the line onto federal ground, you will be detained without exception. As the smoke began to clear, disturbing allegations began circulating through federal channels. Leaked footage showed what appeared to be Portland police officers interacting with Antifa organizers before the violence erupted. The footage showed them pointing out which parts of the sidewalk were city property, instructing the crowd to stay just outside the federal arrest zones. Federal attorneys now want to see all communications between local law enforcement and known Antifa figures. DHS sources say the evidence, if verified, could reveal coordination between city officials and groups responsible for repeated attacks on federal agents. The possibility of collusion immediately set off a political firestorm, with lawmakers demanding congressional review. The night's tension did not end with the arrests. In the hours after the strike, an independent journalist was taken into custody by Portland police, not by federal officers. The journalist had been documenting Antifa attacks on officers and recording agitators hurling fireworks and bottles at federal vehicles. His footage later showed him being assaulted by masked rioters before being detained himself. "I was punished for filming the truth," he said in a statement after release. His arrest sparked outrage across media circles, with many accusing the city of protecting radicals while targeting those trying to document the violence. Federal sources privately called it a pattern, that local authorities appear more focused on optics than on stopping criminal activity. By sunrise, the courthouse steps were littered with handcuffs, rubber bullets, and scorched barricades. DHS confirmed that more than a dozen suspects were transferred to federal custody for prosecution. ICE transported several undocumented detainees to processing centers for deportation hearings. At the same time, legal groups demanded the release of communication logs between Portland police and protest organizers. Civil rights lawyers filed motions seeking information on whether city leadership had ordered officers to stand down as federal forces moved in. Officials from Washington said the investigation will continue, promising that every link between local agencies and violent extremist networks will be uncovered. For now, the streets of Portland are quiet again, but federal investigators say the calm feels temporary, a pause before the next confrontation. Political fallout from the Portland chaos was immediate and fierce. Within hours of the Marine-backed operation, city officials and federal leaders were at war over what had happened. Federal attorneys accused Portland's leadership of creating a sanctuary for lawlessness, arguing that the city's refusal to cooperate with immigration enforcement allowed radical groups and illegal agitators to operate freely. Civil rights lawyers, meanwhile, announced lawsuits against DHS and ICE, claiming the use of federal forces violated local jurisdiction. What followed was a storm of press conferences, accusations, and denials, each side pointing at the other as the reason the city had turned into a battlefield. For Washington, the case was simple. Portland had failed to control its streets, and the federal government had no choice but to intervene. Federal investigators also began piecing together what they described as the ideological core of the violence. According to DHS intelligence briefings, the individuals leading the Portland riots were not acting alone or without purpose. They were part of a wider Antifa network built around a single belief system: no borders, no capitalism, no police, and no nation. The goal, officials said, was not to protest a single event, but to dismantle the American system piece by piece. Antifa's tactics, they claimed, combined propaganda, organized disruption, and online manipulation to create the appearance of spontaneous protest while carefully coordinating attacks behind the scenes. The Portland riot was not random chaos. It was organized ideology in motion. Investigators said they had traced encrypted communications linking multiple Antifa cells across states, many of which had ties to foreign activist groups that specialize in street agitation. "They thrive on disorder," one official said. "The louder the chaos, the easier it is for them to move unseen." As this information surfaced, pressure mounted on Portland's leadership. Lawmakers in Washington began discussing possible federal oversight of the city's law enforcement operations. Investigators said they were exploring whether city officials had ordered police to stand down under pressure from activist voters, allowing Antifa to grow bolder with each protest. The independent journalist's footage became a flashpoint. Proof, some argued, that Portland was targeting truth-tellers instead of criminals. For many residents, it felt like a breaking point. Businesses had been destroyed, streets filled with smoke, and trust in local leadership eroded overnight. Federal attorneys called the events of that week a state-sponsored breakdown of order, saying the federal government could no longer wait for the city to regain control on its own. By the end of the week, the message from Washington was unmistakable. The Marine-led strike had restored calm, but only for a night. Federal commanders warned that Antifa cells and illegal agitators were already regrouping, planning more disruptions under the protection of sanctuary laws. Portland, they said, had become the test case for what happens when ideology replaces enforcement. Officials emphasized that this was not about politics or partisanship. It was about sovereignty, order, and security. If cities will not protect their streets, one federal source said, Washington will. The warning was clear. The next time chaos erupts, the response will be faster, stronger, and broader. For Portland, the battle may have ended that night, but the war over who controls America's streets has only just begun.